important points with regard to the previous lecture. How to recognize a given word and recognition work, and we talked about social languages, and we shed light on the fact that to a great extent people are judged to be or to be given certain identities not because of what they have in their minds, but indeed because of the way they behave and what they are engaged in with regard to the activities, the places where they do sit in, the tools they use, the way they behave, their habits, their customs, the stuff they use, the kind of papers or journals or books they do have. Now, in this lecture, we're going to talk about two grammars. That doesn't mean we are talking about two different languages. What we mean by two grammars is the following. Each social language, social languages, the one that I have just described in the previous lecture, the language you use with different people in different places. Each social language has its own distinctive grammar. However, two different sorts of grammars are important to social languages. This is important. Only one of which we ever think to study formally in school. He means, or we mean, the grammar we learn at school, knowing the nouns, knowing the adjectives, knowing the clauses, subordinate clauses, such stuff that we learned at schools. One grammar is the traditional set of units like nouns. This is the first one. One grammar is the traditional set of units like nouns, verbs, inflections, phrases, and clauses. Phrases and clauses. Clauses like, for example, if I give you a main clause such as I will go to the school, or a subordinate clause for example, if I say if I eat, or when you read, or when you invite me, when you travel, which you bought, for example. One grammar is the traditional set of units like nouns, verbs, inflections, phrases, and clauses. These are real enough, though quite inadequately described in traditional school grammars. Let's call this grammar 1. So what we mean by grammar 1 is the traditional set of units like nouns, verbs, inflections, phrases, clauses. These are real enough, though quite inadequately described in the traditional school grammars. This is what we mean by grammar 1. The other grammar, less studied, but more important, grammar is the rules by which grammatical units like nouns and verbs, phrases and clauses are used to create patterns with signal or index characteristic who, the identity, doing what's. Who is that person and what is he doing, for example, within discourses. That is, we speakers and writers design our oral or written utterances to have patterns in them, in virtue of which interpreters can attribute situated identities and specific activities to us and our utterances. We will call this grammar 2. So grammar 2 is what? The rules by which grammatical units like nouns and verbs, phrases and clauses are used to create patterns which signal or index characteristic who's doing what's within discourses. In other words, I might say the same sentence, a sentence that has the same content, but you will judge me in two different ways depending on these two ways. The other way, in which I used some rules by which grammatical units like nouns and verbs, phrases and clauses are used to create patterns with signal or index characteristic who's doing what's within discourses. In other words, at school we learn grammar. How we have to say a sentence like the flag is raising, the man is visited. We learn that grammar. Where is the noun to be? The subject is to precede the verb. The verb is, for example, this is grammar. But how I do use the rules I apply to use this grammar in order to create in your mind an impression about who I am is the second grammar, which we have called grammar 2. So I might say the same sentence. Grammatically they are the same, grammatically, but I might use some rules, social rules, that can make you judge me to be a person rather than another person, to be from a city or to be from a village. Though I'm talking about the same nouns and the same phrases and the same clauses, but how I use them, the pattern I used in applying these rules will make you judge me to be another person. This is what we mean by grammar 2. The rules I applied in order to apply this grammar, the grammar I learned at school. So the way I say the same thing might differ from one situation and in another situation. So you will judge me to be two person, though the person who says these two sentences is indeed the same. That is, we speakers and writers design our oral or written utterances to have patterns in them, in virtue of which interpreters can attribute situated identities and specific activities to us and our utterances. In other words, the grammar is the same, but I might speak loudly. This is a pattern. You will judge me to be uneducated. But I might say the same sentence, the same nouns, the same verbs, the same grammar, but using another pattern. Speaking calmly, speaking quietly. These are rules. You would judge me to be an educated person, a wise person. Let me give a couple of examples of social languages at work beyond the example of the two different social languages in the warning on the aspirin bottle examples I have used over the years as particularly clear instances of different social languages. This is not the one I'm going to deal with. Now we will consider another example that we will concentrate on, and it is very much important. The example that now I will explain is very much important. Consider, for instance, this is the example I'm talking about, the following case of an upper middle class Anglo-American young woman called Jane. This example is very much important to explain practically what we have taken theoretically. Jane is a girl who belongs to upper middle class. She is American, young woman in her 20s, who was attending one of the author's courses, of course, on language and communication. The course was discussing different social languages, and during the discussion, let me explain it again. The author of the book is talking about a girl called Jane. She was one of his students. The author of the book says that people use different social languages. People speak differently depending on the situation, depending on whom they are talking to. That girl says, no, I do use the same way, whether I'm talking to my boyfriend, whether I'm talking to my parents, whether I'm talking to my friends, whether I'm talking to my colleagues. Jane claimed that she herself didn't use different social languages in different contexts, but rather was consistent using the same language, she means, from context to context. In fact, to do otherwise, she said, would be hypocritical, a failure to be oneself. In order to support her claim that she doesn't change the way she uses in her speech, that she didn't switch her style, she didn't change the language used of speaking in different contexts and for different conversational partners. In other words, she is speaking in the same way whoever the partner with whom she is talking is. And to her boyfriend. Jane decided to record herself talking to her parents and to her boyfriend in order to prove that she doesn't change her social language in any context, and she is consistent in using the same language in every context. She recorded herself talking to her boyfriend and talking to her family about the same subject, about the same topic. In both cases, she decided to discuss a story the class has discussed earlier, so as to be sure that in both contexts, the context of her speaking to her parents and the context of her speaking to her boyfriend, she was talking about the same thing. In the story, a character named Abigail wants to get across a river to see her true love, Gregory. A riverboat captain, Roger, says he will take her only if she consents to sleep with him. In desperation to see Gregory, Abigail agrees to do so. But when she arrives and tells Gregory what she has done, he disowns her and sends her away. There is more to the story, but this is enough for our purposes here. This is the story. Students in my class had been asked to rank order the characters in the story from the most offensive to the least. In explaining to her parents, he means while Jane was talking to her parents why she thought Gregory was the worst, least moral character in the story, the young woman said the following. We will see that Jane, while talking about the same story, she has changed the language. Well, when I thought about it, I don't know. She used the phrase I don't know while talking to her parents. She said, it seemed to me, she used a strong, good phrase like, or sentence like, it seemed to me that Gregory should be the most offensive. Notice the use of the word offensive. He showed no understanding for Abigail. When she told him, notice the use of, when she told him what she was forced to do, the use of a clause. He was callous. He was hypocritical in the sense that he professed to love her, then acted like that. Earlier, when she told the same story to her boyfriend. Earlier in her discussion with her boyfriend, she used another social language while she was not noticing that. Earlier in her discussion with her boyfriend, telling the same story that she has told to her parents, she used another social language while she was not aware of that. In an informal setting, she had also explained why she thought Gregory was the worst character. In this context, she said what that guy was. Notice she used guy, the word that she was not used, she didn't use with her parents. You know, her boyfriend. I should hope if I ever did that to see you, you would shoot the guy. He uses her and he says he loves her. Roger never lies. You know what I mean. It was clear even to Jane that she had used two very different forms of language. It is not the same language that was used with her parents and with her boyfriend. The differences between Jane's two social languages are everywhere apparent in the two texts. The language used with her boyfriend, let me say in an informal context, differs from the language used by her father and mother. To her parents, she carefully hedges her claims. She used I don't know. It seemed to me. To her boyfriend, she makes her claims straight away, or straight out, sorry. To her boyfriend, she uses terms like guy, while to her parents she uses more formal terms like offensive, understanding, hypocritical. She also uses more formal sentence structure to her parents. It seemed to me that he showed no understanding. He was hypocritical in the sense that, then she goes to her boyfriend. That guy, notice when she was talking to her boyfriend, she said, that guy, you know, her boyfriend. Roger never lies, you know. The repetition of you know, something which is informal in the language. What I mean, you know what I mean. That was not used with her parents. She didn't keep saying, you know, for her father and mother. Jane repeatedly addresses her boyfriend as you, thereby noting his social involvement as a listener, but doesn't directly address her parents in this way. In talking to her boyfriend, she leaves several points to be inferred. She left some points to be understood by him, points that she spells out more explicitly. She said more clearly when she was talking to her father as a matter of respecting to them. Example, her boyfriend must infer that Georgie is being accused of being a hypocrite. The word that was not used with him but was used while she was talking to her parents. From the information that though Roger is bad, at least he doesn't lie. Okay, all in all, and this is the most important point, Jane appears to use more school-like language to her parents. This is one social language. Her language to them requires less inferencing on their part and distances them as listeners from social and emotional involvement with what she is saying, while stressing perhaps their cognitive involvement and their judgment of her and her intelligence. In other words, she was talking to them in a way that can help her appear as educated, clever, from the viewpoint of her parents, and intelligent, clever. Her language to her boyfriend, on the other hand, stresses social and effective involvement, solidarity, and co-participation in meaning making. This young woman is making visible and recognizable two different versions of who she is and what she is doing. In one case, she is a beautiful and intelligent daughter from the viewpoint of her parents, having dinner with her proud parents, proud of her to be educated. And in the other case, she is a girlfriend being intimate with her boyfriend. So we're talking about two different social languages used by the same person while telling the same story in two different contexts. By saying that, I would like to thank you, and I hope everything is very clear and understood. Thank you so much.